Welcome to the church library. Draw up a chair and join us as we sort through these stacks of old books. I'm Marissa Burt.
And I'm Kelsey McGinnis. And here in the church library, we host conversations about popular Christian books. This season, we are dusting off Christian parenting resources.
Our book, The Myth of Good Christian Parenting, How False Promises Betrayed a Generation of Evangelical Families, examines many of these books, the obscure, the bestsellers, the ones that still pop up in church parenting classes.
Let's see what's on the bookshelves today.
Hello, listeners. Hi, Marissa.
Hey, Kelsey. Good to see you.
Good to see you, too. We are here today with Catherine McNiel and Jason Hague, and we are so excited to have a conversation about their book, Mid-Faith Crisis, and how their work intersects with our book.
Yes, this was one of my favorite reads this spring. I really enjoyed it, and I think everyone should read it. But can you tell us a little bit about yourselves and the book and how it came to be?
So my name is Catherine McNiel, and I'm an author and a chaplain who lives in the Chicagoland area. And Jason and I have been friends for a while. We're both authors, and we were talking a little bit about just our own faith journeys and our own crises. I'll let Jason probably take it from here, but we've discovered that we both, in our different roles, he as a pastor, me as a chaplain, encounter a lot of people who have found that their life cycle of faith is just not following the trajectory that maybe they expected it to based on what they were taught early on. And we wanted to provide a resource that would help those people who are disoriented or disillusioned or doubting to maybe make some sense of what they were encountering.
Yeah, as Catherine said, I'm a pastor out in Oregon, and in addition to talking to friends who are going through this, I sort of found myself in a place where I was having all these questions and doubts that I simply did not want. And it had grown out of just really hard stuff that I was going through with my family and a lot of other things too, just in the world in general. And so it honestly kind of came out of me reflecting to Catherine because we were friends and I was texting her about some hard stuff going on in my life. And she sort of just had this idea, threw it out there of like, some of this that we're going through is simply because of the phase of life that we find ourselves in. And this is actually very, very common. And out of that text exchange, the book grew.
What a timely conversation you all had then, and what a great moment for this to release into the world. My husband's a pastor as well, and we see similar things in the pews all the time. People navigating. In fact, the subtitle to your book is Finding a Path Through Doubt, Disillusionment, and Dead Ends. And I love that because it really captures common experience in the faith journey. And you write about this a little bit. Maybe, Catherine, could you speak to it of the stages of faith formation and how you see your work fitting into that concept?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Jason and I are both storytellers. We love to do a lot of research and a lot of studying, but we're not going to probably write an academic book. So I don't want to scare the readers off. This book is full of stories. But we ourselves did a lot of research before we wrote it. And what we found is that so many people have taken a look at developmental stages of faith, just as we look at developmental stages of our physical body or our social, emotional bodies. And have found that there is a pretty straightforward trajectory that, well, not straightforward, but common, easily predictable trajectory of faith that most people encounter certain stages along the way. And the first one, we decided to give them our own names and kind of make our own framework rather than constantly be pulling from different researchers. But initially, whether we are born into one faith or another, we view the world early on just by what we're taught. And tends to be a little bit cartoonish. Those of us who grew up in a Christian faith are going to imagine God maybe like up in the clouds, and we imagine an old man with a beard. But of course, we know now that's not actually true about God. As we mature, we go into what we called a confident faith, where we have maybe gone through confirmation, or maybe we've been baptized, or maybe we've joined the church, or we've made a commitment at camp, or something we've done to say, you know what, I learned all this stuff from my parents or from my church, and I want to make it my own. This is who I am. And I think most churches and most ministries and even most books are assuming that that's kind of, you're done now. Like, you made it. You're there. And now you just need to kind of like stay faithful through the journey. But what the researchers have found is that there is a moment where you hit a wall that comes after you've got it all figured out, where suddenly you have nothing figured out, where it feels like everything is just falling through your fingertips, where you're disoriented and disillusioned and confused and full of doubts. And I think there's a whole other set of books and podcasts and frameworks that says, and now this is the end. Like, there's nowhere to go from here. But what the researchers have found is that there is still more beyond that, where if we can get through this period of pain and suffering and crisis, that there is faith on the other side that is much more authentic to who we are, much more authentic to the realities of the world, that is not forcing us to choose kind of black and white, this or that, off or on statements, but to hold the ambiguities and the tensions and the troubles alongside of the joys and the hopes. And that's what we're hoping we can encourage each other and our readers and listeners to get to, is this more hopeful, more peaceful, less tense faith on the other side of all this crisis.
Oh, that's so good. I love everything you said there, and how it describes something that I think can resonate with where a lot of people may find themselves on that journey, but offers something hopeful as well, because sometimes it can feel like that's the end, or particularly for people who've been raised in cultures of high certainty. That's something we discuss a lot in our book, The Myth of Good Christian Parenting, because so many of the promises that were made to parents were very certain, were very clear.
Yeah.
Like, if you do this, this will happen, or, kind of playing on those devout desires. So many parents who really desire, I want my child to be walking with the Lord, or I envision it looking a certain way. And the end result of that is everyone is in this high stakes, you got to do it right, there's a right way to do it, figure it out kind of thinking.
Yes.
And when the receipt comes due for that, which it will eventually, it can feel so overwhelming, like this big implosion with no hope or even guidance for how to navigate. And I love how in your book, I love that you said you have stories, because to me it also felt like you're kind of companions on this journey. Like, I love the tone with which you both write, that is very accessible, but also like you're walking alongside this questioning journey. And I know you're both parents. You've both written about your experiences of parenting. I'm wondering if you could speak to that. Maybe we'll start with you, Jason, here for this one. How maybe these myths of certainty in Christian parenting have brushed up against your own stories.
Oh, man. Yeah, I'm so glad you guys are putting your book out, because I feel like this is such a big deal. And I think it really trips so many people up. One of the things we were thinking about, initially this book, obviously, it's called Mid-Faith Crisis because it was corresponding to midlife. And that's initially what we were looking at. And then we broadened it out because a lot of people have crisis of faith at other times. But we were looking at people in our age group, and they get in their 30s and 40s, and it's like, wait, this isn't lining up. And one of the biggest places that happens is in parenting. So wait, I was told, I was told to spare the rod and spoil the child, or whatever. I was told that if you train up a child in the way he should go, they won't depart from it. Like all of these things, this cherry picking of Proverbs oftentimes, which is a complete misreading. But those kinds of things, when we look and we see a formula and we said, I did the formula and it didn't work. And we start seeing our kids have a hard time with that. So, I mean, you know, my wife was raised in sort of a Gothard adjacent sort of world. So they would, you know, go to the Gothard seminars, and then there were some of the other things that got in that was even more extreme. And I wasn't over there, but you know, it was very much a certainty based thing. Raise your kids this way, they'll turn out this way. And so early on, you know, everything was, you know, when your kids are really little, you feel like, hey, I'm killing it. This is great. And then we had a son who was diagnosed with autism. And we realized, wait, none of the things people are telling us to do, none of that's working. And so, you know, we have a couple of things that could be going on here. One is that he's just an exception, or another is that, oh, wait, maybe there is no perfect playbook here. And maybe we actually have to, imagine this, like seek the wisdom of God in knowing how to raise each one of our kids. But I think this is a huge reason why we see so many people in their 30s and 40s dropping out of church and having these huge questions, because they're like, my kids were supposed to be fine, like, and they weren't supposed to be sick, or they weren't, you know, we were supposed to be safe, and we're not. So you know, we didn't go into this kind of thing specifically in this book, but I do think there's massive crossover, and it's one of the reasons why people in the 30s and 40s are having so much trouble in church.
I wonder if you could maybe say one thing that I spend a lot of time thinking about is in the stages of faith that you both articulate, or these stages of faith formation. I think there's this like underlying belief among many, I would say especially evangelical Christians, that in childhood, healthy faith formation sort of starts with a lot of certainty and a lot of black and white thinking. Like if you can sort of like start with the simple black and white, absolute certainty, kind of lock it down, you know, like this sort of like lock it down approach to raising young children. This shows up in, you know, you should start spanking early, because if you do that, they'll respect authority early, and you won't have to do it as they get older. There's this real, there seems to me to be this pattern of, if you can get it right, and you can get it kind of like this black and white stage, fully formed, as close to cement as you can, like you were saying, they won't depart from it, or you have the best chance of them not having a faith crisis later. Does that resonate at all with the stories that you were telling, or with your own experiences? And have you seen that backfire?
I was thinking, you know, in stages of faith, you almost have to, when kids are little, start with things being more black and white. Like that's a natural phase of development. I think what happens so many times in religious circles, we try to hold on to those things for too long. We try to keep oversimplifying everything. So way after people are at a stage when they can reason, we're still telling them, no, don't use your reason. Don't use your reason. Use these really simple answers that we learned in, you know, when you were 3. So I think that's one of the big problems. Catherine, I'm sure, can elaborate more on that.
Yeah, I think, like Jason said, and like we all know, like we are concrete thinkers at age 5. We are not prepared to think in nuance, but I think if our only path for discipleship is to try to stunt our children and ourselves at age 7 of maturity, that just can't be making disciples. That is destroying people. So, you know, my oldest just graduated from high school, and it's been fascinating for me to watch kind of the curriculum of even just the books that he's asked to read. You know, and I kind of explained to him, you know, in elementary school, they're having you read things that are just like, yes, the good guy's the good guy, the bad guy's the bad guy. Like, it all turned out the way I thought it was going to. And in middle school, they're going to start messing with that a little bit. You know, they're going to assign you books where things are just a little bit more complicated than I thought. And then in high school, they're going to give you books where, you know, we're reading all, you know, The Catcher in the Rye and the, you know, To Kill a Mockingbird, and books where it's just like, man, this is devastating, but we need to kind of wrestle through these complicated narratives and stories if we're going to contribute to our complicated actual realities. Because in college, then they're asking you to build a solution to some of these real problems that you've learned to understand and wrestle with and grapple with. And that's how we follow Jesus, I think, is by building people, not through novels necessarily, although Jason and I would love it if that was how we discipled people, but by, yes, offering developmental stages appropriateness of God is love and pain is real and joy is available, but making it complicated and nuanced as we go until we have adult children who can wrestle with us about the realities, because the pain is going to come, the complications are going to come, the nuance is going to come. And if we don't have the tools because we've been stunted at age 7, then we're going to have a crisis.
Yeah, it makes me think too how other ingredients that play into this are limiting access. Often Christian parents are encouraged to limit access to maybe novels that would raise these questions or other perspectives. And also given sometimes resources that operate as though the more the better, the earlier better for Christian content, like board books that are doing Koine Greek or something, like, so this idea of like the more the better of a certain kind of thing with little regard to child development or developmental thinking, and then leaving other avenues unexplored or bereft. And then often people are shamed, then young adults are shamed when they get to that point, and they are written off as backsliding, and parents are left really ill-equipped for how they haven't had any or have had little experience practicing. What does it mean to parent outside of this? You comply. That's the main goal, expected obedience. So it really leaves a lot of people, I think, in pain and ashamed and confused and any number of things down the road when that stage does come. I love what you said, Jason, about your son's diagnosis kind of reframing things for you and becoming almost a gateway out of that kind of thinking, because we hear that from a number of parents, that having a child who had unique needs of some kind, often whether it's their neurodivergence or something unique about their child, that they realized this isn't going to work. this one size fits all doesn't fit everyone. And it for many became a way for them to leave that. We also hear from adult children who were late in life diagnosed and realized, it wasn't a gateway out for their parents. It just escalated the discipline because that was the only tool given. I'm wondering, Jason, from your perspective in a church context, what can churches be doing to support families? When we read these resources, many of them say nothing about neurodivergence, disability, even according to the language of the day, like special needs or anything back in the 80s and 90s. But it's something we hear a lot about parents from parents actively parenting now. I think they're connecting online. They're kind of finding a path forward. What do you think the church can be doing to support families who discover this?
I think a couple of things. We had to, I came on staff just at our current church early after my son's diagnosis, and and my wife did too. And we told them, guys, there's a few things happening here. My son cannot hang in the service and he can't hang with the kids. So we need to do something. And we started realizing, I started blogging a lot on this whole issue and special needs families and basically being homebound all the time because they want to protect their child or whatever. And in the process, they lose community.
Yeah.
And I've seen that over and over again with special needs families or just losing, they don't have anybody around them to support them. So, we decided to, initiate a whole sensory safe room for kids on Sunday mornings. And we, as we were the local experts because we just had a kid like this. So we started, my wife in particular, started resourcing, getting sensory toys and different things. We hired somebody who worked professionally in this realm. And we just started inviting the community. Like, if you guys you just want to go to church, you just miss being able to go to church, come over. And if your kid wants to hang here, then you can at least have that 90 minutes to worship and pray and feel the beginning seeds of community. And that it turned out to be a incredibly helpful thing for our family because we could do that, and for a whole lot of others in the community. But the other side of that is the church leadership, and I was lucky enough to be on both ends there, but church leadership needs to start talking about particularly if it's a more conservative congregation, we need to start telling our stories and talking about things like, hey, don't assume this is a discipline issue. Don't assume that if this child is having trouble, that they're just being selfish or something that we would have heard back in the day. Because we would see that kind of thing of like, oh, that child just needs to obey. Man, we got to start, well, you know what? And there's always a story of somebody they knew or, man, and they just started cracking down with some discipline. And, man, we didn't have autism in our day or whatever. And we have to start facing those things and go, listen, we have to love these families and we have to love these children. And we're going to have to unlearn some things. So we did some of that from the front, from the stage, so people were able to start understanding. And honestly, it really worked. We have so many in our congregation now, and people are just like okay with it and have a grid for it. And I think we have to be able to give people a grid for that in churches.
I have a lot of things that I would like to say about the neurodivergence, or like to ask about the neurodivergence piece of this, because as we were writing our book, we found ourselves trying to decide how much to deal with that, because neither of us have direct experience with it, but it's something we hear about all the time, and something we hear parents struggle with, not just in terms of how do I be part of a faith community here, but what did I do something, right? There's this like prosperity gospel that a lot of parents have internalized, that starts to sow seeds of doubt about God's goodness when they start to have to grapple with, what does this mean for me and my family? What did I do? Who sinned that my child was born this way? And I think there are a lot of parents who deal with that thinking on a variety of fronts, like because they've internalized these ideas about what their life, what their family is going to look like if they can do it right. And so I think parenthood becomes this place of, as you said, kind of breaking down some of the black and white categories or the way that they've thought about God, partly because of this way that the prosperity gospel seems to have worked in. And I wondered if you could maybe talk about some of the ways that those kinds of like beliefs about the promises of God get twisted in ways that feed these crises and almost make them feel insurmountable. Does that make sense? Sorry, that was a very long-winded question.
Yeah. No, I think part of the problem is we live in America and there is so much prosperity and there's so much health that we have this picture of like, this is what perfect looks like. And this is what we can expect. And hardship is only going to be the exception to the rule. And so when we find ourselves, having a pervasive diagnosis that just makes life difficult in some ways, especially for our child, then we're like, what did we do wrong? And if you come from charismatic Pentecostal environments like I do, those kinds of questions do come up, and you'll have people like, well, we gotta, when to constantly wanting to pray, and man, you take authority. There's a great buzzword in those circles over this thing when it's like, well, this is my child who I love. So we have to reframe some of these things. What is, I mean, some of it's just very theological. What is the good life actually? Is this where we all come and nobody has any difficulties? Is that what we're looking for? Because that's not what we're going to find. So my son has a great difficulty. He cannot speak. He would love to be able to speak, but he cannot speak. So where do we go from there? Do we not value him as much because he is unable to do something that everyone else around him can do? Is it, hey, whoever you are, whatever ability or disability or differing ability, whatever verbiage you want to use, they are so valuable and so beautiful in the eyes of God, and they ought to be valued here, no matter what our expectations were, no matter what they were, because those are in my first book, I talk about our expectations for like propaganda films that we just show ourselves all the time. And whatever those propaganda films told us years ago, that's not true. That's not happening. So where are we now? And I think being able to face that and being able to say, here's where we are. It might be difficult, but there's also going to be beauty. We've got to wean ourselves off of these idealistic pictures that we were raised with.
Yeah, listening to you speak, it makes me think of the families we hear from navigating estrangement and inauthentic connection down the road in their extended family relationships, because that, I like how you said that propaganda video is still showing in their minds. Like, if my children aren't doing X, Y, and Z, or if my parents aren't able to do X, Y, and Z, then there's no way forward for us. And it's, I think, a very painful kind of reckoning. So I love the idea of the internal work, that the invitation that internal work can have to say, maybe there is a path forward. It's going to look really different than everyone thought, perhaps. But it involves a lot. Sometimes there's a lot of painful betrayal, and betrayal from churches as well, which I know is something you write about, Catherine, as part of your personal story.
Yeah.
As a young child navigating that, kind of seeing the fallout of losing a parish community, losing a beloved community. I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit, however you'd like, but in particular, this is something we don't talk about a lot, is how these kind of betrayals affect children whose church has once been a safe place for them, and now it's just all fallen apart. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Part of the reason why we moved this from a conversation about faith in midlife to mid-faith crisis is that all of these kind of propaganda films or maybe false beliefs about a prosperity gospel fell apart for me when I was 12, which is ideally a long time before midlife. So I'll encourage the reader to pick up a copy of the book. I'm not going to rehash all the details of the story now, but for a number of complicated reasons, the church that I grew up in essentially sent my family packing out of town. So just based on how kind of the timing worked out, it was basically everyone that I knew in the world. So I felt abandoned and exiled by the whole world, because there were others in the world, several billion, but I didn't know them and they didn't know me. And so whenever someone is having a faith crisis that's based on, all of these topics are pain. They're all about suffering, whether it's at the hand of a diagnosis or an illness or a doctrinal break that doesn't make sense anymore, or depression, or abuse, abandonment. It all comes down to pain. So when someone comes to me and says that they just can't hang in there anymore with the Christian faith or with the promises that they were taught of those propaganda films because of how a person or a leader or a Christian hero or a Christian community impacted them, I really, really get that, because it breaks trust. And I think for a kid, it's hard, and as an adult, we can say, that person hurt me, but there are other people who are safe, or that community harmed me, but other communities are safe. But when you're a kid, you just don't know that bigger context. And so I think we tend to imbibe just inability to trust or inability to be known. And we also kids are resilient. That's a phrase we love to say. Kids are resilient, and that's true. But some of these early wounds are resilient also in kids. And so I would love to call attention to some of the impact that is happening on the kids as their parents are suffering some of these church community breakdowns, that the kids are being impacted as well.
Yeah.
Can you say more about, and this can be either from your story or other stories, but children who experience these kinds of challenges to faith so early on, What are some of the particular, I don't know, not problems, problems is the wrong word, but what is particular about experiencing it at that young age?
Yeah.
Like I think so many 20 somethings can relate to a crisis of faith, or 30 somethings. It seems like there are things that you encounter later, but for children who are still also, especially when they're so dependent on their parents for access to a community, what are some of the particularities that you wrote about when it comes to having that happen to you at such a young age?
Yeah, at the time, I would say there were no silver linings. There was just upheaval and pain and loss. With that, like you said, my parents could seek help. My parents could seek out church, but I was just sort of being dragged along from place to place. There wasn't the similar way to kind of self-advocate that adults have. I think, I can't speak for everybody. Everyone is in a different situation, and everyone brings a different temperament and set of resources and skills to it. But for me, I think there's two sides of the coin. And the one is that I truly and genuinely lost kind of that childish ability to trust and to hope and to believe in people. I never lost my belief in God, but I just began questioning everything before I kind of reached that developmental stage of certainty and identity and confidence. And so I think that set me back for a long, long time. But the other side of that coin of having so much shaken when I was so young is that I don't have a lot of this kind of disorientation now that you've been describing. I never thought there was a formula that would bring me to safety. I never thought that there were promises of God that would insulate me from pain. So the flip side now, literally decades and decades and decades, and I don't want to undersell how long it takes to get to redemption. And the wounds never heal and the scar tissue never goes away, but I also have this faith that was built on top of all of these things breaking, that I think someone who's encountering these questions for the first time in their 40s might not be able to have even a vision for, if that makes sense. And so I do, now that I'm almost 50, I have gratitude, not for any of what I went through. I would change all of that in a heartbeat. But gratitude for the vision that I have, that there is a goodness that can handle the complexities, and there is a peace and a hope that can handle the nuances of pain and suffering and evil in the world. And so I guess for a parent listening who wishes their child hadn't encountered some of the things that they encountered so early on, I can't say that there's a silver lining, because evil is just evil and pain is just pain, and abuse is just abuse, and toxicity is just toxicity. But I do believe that God is making all things new.
I wonder what you would say. I imagine the readers that we've talked to who are interested in our book is not out yet, but the people who we've talked to about the project, it's a combination of people who are still, faithfully in church community, but there's a strong contingent who have left, and people who've left faith altogether. And, you mentioned earlier that there's sort of this, it seems like when you hit a faith crisis, there's a set of well-worn paths that you can take, which is sort of like you deconstruct and you end there.
Yeah.
And there's a whole set of resources for you if that's you. And then, or there's sort of the pass through the dark night of the soul and come out stronger on the other side. There are these narratives that people like.
Yeah.
And I wonder, what you would say to readers of yours and ours whose faith is kind of being shaken mid-faith, either by parenthood or by some other hurt, about an alternative to those well-worn, as you've told these stories, your own and others, what does it look like to go through and to not necessarily treat the other side of it as an end point, but what does it look like to go through and let go of those teachings that have become so part of your faith journey? And I think for a lot of evangelicals, the teachings of Christian parenting literature become so crucial to their faith, right? Beliefs about sin, beliefs about behavior, about authority, about God's desire to cause pain in order to kind of visit justice on you for your sin, all these beliefs. What have you learned about what it looks like to walk through that and let go of some things?
I guess one thing that struck me as you were asking that question, especially about the well-worn paths, I absolutely agree that I think your three options when you hit a faith crisis are to sweep it under the rug, push it into the closet, pretend this is not happening, white knuckle it. Another one is to just say, oh, I reached this point, I'm out of here. A third one, like you said, is to be like, oh, God works everything together for good, like stronger days ahead. And I think the reason these are such well-worn paths is because it was our deep love of formulas that got us here. And so we're looking for a formula to get us out. Do you know what I mean? And gosh, as much as I hate to say it, there's just not a formula for life, life is complicated and messy. We are complicated and messy. We don't have any control of what's coming. We don't have any control over what's already come. We need to, I think, hold hands with each other, make eye contact with each other and say, this is really hard. Help me keep breathing. I'm going to help you keep breathing. Squeeze my hand, squeeze it harder, and just keep trying to get through day by day. And joy is going to come, and hope is going to come, and suffering is going to come, and trouble's going to come. But if we can find a few hands to hold and squeeze, a few eyes to make contact with, I think we will make it through, but it's not going to be on a well-worn path that leads us to ultimate hope, because we're just going to end up with a different set of formulas that also let us down the road.
That's so good. And as you were answering that, I found myself thinking, you both work kind of in different kinds of ministries, and have encountered lots of different faith communities. In our book, we talk about green light metrics for resources that we're sort of trying to help parents find a healthier version of help, what they're looking for. And I wonder if for both of you, you have your own sort of green lights and red lights for what a faith community looks like, where it is safe to go through this kind of a mid-faith crisis. What does healthy faith community look like that welcomes that and doesn't immediately try to Band-Aid on the problem, you know what I mean? Or try to either Band-Aid for the problem or see you later, what does it look like to cultivate a healthy, life-giving faith for people as they walk through, regardless of what you think that trajectory might end up being?
Well, I think when you walk in a church, a lot of times it's really easy to pick up on some unhealthy stuff. And so a lot of times I think maybe people are looking for, man, I want to go to a church that is an institution in a certain building with a certain person up front that I know I can feel safe in all of it. And that's a really tall order. You can pick stuff out right away. If somebody's up there and all, if a pastor is constantly self-aggrandizing or shaming people for their sin, you're like, hey, this is not a good place. This is not a good place for you. But it's going to be harder. I think the fact is those environments are not usually going to be apparent in a sanctuary. They're going to be more apparent sitting around a table and sitting in a living room. And to be able to find a community or form a community, sometimes this happens with other people who have walked through really hard things. But you're doing it together as followers of Jesus to be able to say, man, I don't know what to do. I'm having doubts. I'm having frustrations. I'm having deep grief. I'm struggling in resentment or whatever it is, to be able to go through those things together. That has been one of the greatest gifts that I have ever received is having that kind of community and having people who I've been able to come and share all manner of things with and to walk alongside me. I'm not going to find that probably too often on a Sunday morning, except you're going to have, I've tried to, as being a pastor, I've tried to, and our whole staff has tried to open the door for people to have messy lives, to be in process, to not be shamed for being in process. So we can try to create, to set the table as much as we can for that. And to know it's okay. It's okay that you don't have all the answers. It's okay that you're struggling in doubt. It's okay that you're a parent and your kid is estranged from you. Not all my kids are walking with the Lord, and I'm a pastor. So that's one of those things. It's like, oh, should you even be a pastor? Is your house in order? Those kinds of things. But you know what? I don't know all the answers to those questions, but what I can say is, man, I love my kids, and I love God, and I'm following as well as I can, and I'm on a journey just like everybody else. So I think, showing some vulnerability there is really key as well. But I just think most of the time people sometimes have expectations that they're going to walk into a sanctuary where everything is just right in that sanctuary, and then that's where they're going to find healing. And I think that's that might not be very realistic.
Oh, I love that. I love what you just said there. And it makes me think of, sometimes we will note that you can learn a lot about a church culture based on the way children in the church are treated, like the family life teaching.
Yes.
Because if there are these expectations for like instant obedience and performance of children, that will be the same expectation on parishioners from the spiritual parents in the community as well. And I love
that is really insightful, Marissa. I love that.
Yeah. I mean, it seems to like track, right? Like in people's stories, but I love how what you described offers an opportunity for the kind of more attuned parenting, or parenting that even the description you had in the beginning of makes space for the individual needs of the children and the families coming through the doors. That's a really different parenting paradigm and pastoring paradigm as a result. And I think it's not incidental that the New Testament uses the language of family for church life, even though we're heavily invested in institutional church life for a number of reasons. And I'll be thinking about what you said there about, for a while, of maybe this green light opportunity doesn't necessarily come in the sanctuary, as meaningful as that can be. Maybe it comes in smaller gatherings of the body, and maybe sometime, hopefully there are people listening who maybe need to hear that. They have permission to find the body of Christ in maybe an unconventional looking way. Yeah. Particularly those who, I think a lot of people who experience these painful things they can barely walk through the doors of a sanctuary, without a panic attack or something. Yeah. And so if you're listening and need that permission, it's a good reminder that Jesus is present in his body outside of the sanctuary.
Yeah.
And I'm a pastor. I love Sunday morning gatherings, and I cherish the opportunity to come and try to, for one thing, try to undo some of the damage people have had from, authoritarian and really toxic leadership, and try to say that's not who God is. So I cherish that, and I love that Sunday morning. And to me, that is often what we hope in our congregation is that's a front door to living rooms. That's a place where people come in and oftentimes make those relationships. So I don't think I don't want to denigrate that at all, but like the fact is that's not usually where you're going to find deep connection and healing. It's just not. You're going to hear some things, and you're going to get some paradigms in order, and hopefully meet with God in the presence of lots of other people. But the true healing is going to happen when you can share with someone and look into their eyes, and they can say, I'm so sorry, let's walk together. And that doesn't usually happen. You don't have that opportunity on a Sunday morning.
Yeah. And I want to add into one thing that Jason and I wrestled with a lot as we wrote through these chapters is when you have been so harmed, either by the teachings of a church or the people of a church or a leader of a church, what you need is healing community, but you really can't get to it because you are, you have a panic attack, like you said. And one thing that we really wrestled with a lot is how none of us when we finally, if we do, get to a place where we can walk in the door again or invite people around the table again or go to coffee again, start to open ourselves up, looking for those hands to hold and those eyes to see and be seen by, none of us are going to find a perfect person that's never going to hurt us. Each of us are imperfect. And as we gather as humans, we create gatherings that are imperfect, but there is a difference between toxic and abusive and imperfect, but humble and loving. And so I think looking for compassion, looking for humility, those are green lights, because we're not going to find perfect. We're not going to find people or a gathering of people that are never going to let us down. But there is a big difference between toxic and abusive, and loving and compassionate, but imperfect.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that tracks too with parenting down the road as well, because I think we hear from a number of adult children who are in deep pain. And of course, there's that longing for perfection, perfect parents. Right. But often the future of a relationship hinges on parental humility, the capacity to be humble and listen, attempt repair, a number of things that do allow for imperfection, but also healthy relationships.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so good. I'm so glad you guys wrote this book. I'm so glad.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a really gracious way of talking about and sort of normalizing the seasons of doubt as not like these like horrible encounters to be like one, but this sort of this like, I don't know how to describe it. You guys describe it better than I do. But it's sort of normalizing those as changing of seasons. And I think that's really beautiful for those of us who have maybe gone through more than one sort of crisis of faith at different points in life. I can point to multiple moments in my own walk with God where faith has looked and felt very, very different. And not always feeling permission to have something other than the sort of certainty to walk you through, the sort of the blessed assurance to walk you through the rest of your life. It just doesn't always feel that constant. And so I love that this book normalizes that and tells people it's okay if it doesn't always feel so constant.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, and for those listening, I hope you'll pick up a copy. I wanted to note a few features of the book that I thought were really unique. I liked how every chapter does end with some kind of open-ended questions for consideration for people to kind of see where their stories are maybe intersecting with the content. And I liked that you included listening lists, like suggested things to listen to, music, and also suggested resources for further reading. I think that was a really lovely kind of light-handed spiritual direction, like for people that respected people's agency and where they're maybe at in their own journeys, but gave them somewhere to go, not just to feel. And I also wanted to note for those listening, if it's okay, some of the chapter titles, because we've touched on some of the things you guys write about, but you write about other things that cause these moments of crisis that we aren't able to touch on. So some of the things you write about are when doubt crept in, when church was harmful, when our heroes fell. Oh, that's a big one. When our prayers fell silent, when suffering consumed us, when our beliefs collapsed, when feelings faded. So it covers a lot of ground that I think will resonate with a number of people. If listeners are looking to connect with you all further, how can they do that? We'll drop things in the show notes, but where are places they can connect with you online?
Well, my website and all my social media is at catherinemcneil.com or whatever. That's my handle. That's my website. So Catherine McNiel, as long as you can spell it right. Those are two names that have a lot of different spellings, but you can find me at Catherine McNiel. And then also we have a website for the book. It's midfaithcrisis.com.
Okay. Great. And you've written a couple of other books.
I have, yes. This is my fourth book, actually.
Okay. So if you want to read more from Catherine, you can do that
Yes,
as well. And what
I
about
would
you,
love that.
Jason? Where
Yeah, you can find me at jasonhague.com, and I have a Facebook writer page too of Jason Hague Writer. And this is my second book, so I am not quite as accomplished as Catherine McNiel, but it's been a great experience.
Yeah. Anything future in the works for either of you, or that you can speak to? Or are you still recovering from the writing process?
We are still in the postpartum season.
Because book launch is pretty intense. Yes.
It
indeed.
is. It's not our favorite thing. No, we don't have anything directly planned. We joke about it a lot, but I think we both have our separate projects that, I'm trying to get Catherine to write a theology of suffering based on partly her experience as a chaplain. I keep saying this like publicly.
You do.
No, I know. I can see that look in your face. Like, what are you doing to me right now? But I think it would be so great.
Yeah, I could see that.
Well, okay.
You're going to speak it into being, Jason.
If any editors or publishers would like to speak to Catherine about Jason's book idea.
Like a memoir, like not just a deep academic thing, but like a memoir that deals with these things, I'm telling you, that would rock. But that would be her book, not mine.
Let us know when it happens.
Yeah, okay.
Sounds like it's for sure going to happen.
Any final questions, Kelsey, or any final thoughts, Catherine or Jason? Anything you want to leave people with?
I want to. Oh, sorry, you were about to start. I totally stepped on you. Okay. I just want to encourage people in this process to stay curious. To stay curious. Like, there's going to be a lot of hard things, but there also really are some beautiful things. And God is still there walking with you. So stay curious. There's going to be some beautiful ways, I think, that you can still be surprised and find new ways to experience God again.
And I would just want to connect with the reader and say that you are not alone. A crisis is full of pain, and a crisis of faith feels like wilderness, and it feels isolating. But we are literally here to tell you that you are surrounded by others, by friends, by walking partners, by people on the journey, and reach out. You are not alone.
Thank you so much, both of you, for being with us today.
Thank you.
In our little church library here. Again, we've been talking with Catherine McNiel and Jason Hague, and their book is Mid-Faith Crisis, Finding a Path Through Doubt, Disillusionment, and Dead Ends. And you can get it now wherever you get your books. So thank you again, both of you. And listeners, we will see you next time in the church library.
We are so glad you've joined us in the church library today. This is Marissa Franksbert
and Kelsey Kramer McGinnis. And if you liked what you heard here, we think you'll be interested in reading our forthcoming book, The Myth of Good Christian Parenting: How False Promises Betrayed a Generation of Evangelical Families.
You can pre-order it now wherever books are sold, and it'll be on shelves in October of 2025.